Plus, this is the economic argument. I get a kick out of this one. Well, this is what we ended up talking about in class that day. When you consider the sheer number of people employed in law enforcement, making laws, all of Congress, blah, 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 you've got this tremendous chunk of the economy, right? So, while murderers aren't good, cops that stop murderers are, so we pay them. A big chunk of our economy goes towards deviants, but in kind of a funky way. Not helping the deviants themselves, but the CJ folks that keep that whole side of things in line. Does that make sense? It's funny because when you say it this way, it sounds like you're some raving red-headed radical. A large number of law enforcement people wouldn't be employed. Like it's a conspiracy theory. Of course, if we say it from an economic thing, well, 7% of the GDP is devoted to law enforcement and prisons and Congress. Oh, that's a good thing. Yeah, it's a nice industry. Perspective. Okay.
Why are they ranking everything after this?
I don't know. In my head, I got a picture of someone dressed up in their Chavez jacket with the maybe I should say red shirt with the Che Guevara and the red flag. Maybe it's only the goth kids that dye their hair funky red. But that's commitment, right? Okay. Do women have to be scared of strange men? No, they have to be afraid of the men they know. The land of the free has almost nobody in prison, right? No. The U.S. has the highest per capita prison rate in the world. At least that's what these guys say. And I kind of believe it. And I think we talked about it a little bit. And largely this comes out of a get tough approach to crime that started in the 70s, right? Now, the thing is, and this is going to be an academic sociologist is going to bring this up every time. The problem with the get tough approach is we got tough and it feels good, right? Somebody does something bad, I want to. We got the camera going. Somebody does something bad, I would like to see them, punished. However, even if it's emotionally satisfying to get tough, it doesn't really appear to have a ton of impact on crime. Now, well, not now. Just remember that for the test, you'll be okay. All right, I will say. Here's where I have, but see, I'm just going to screw you up. Okay, brackets. Brackets, not on test. Here's the thing. Before class, I was talking to Tyler here about how safe or dangerous things are perceived to be. And one of the things is, over the last few decades, actual things to be afraid of have gone down. People's fear level has really gone up, right? So even though I was allowed to wander around outdoors in the city, granted Omaha's a scary town, but I was allowed to wander around outdoors in the city as a kid, because it was way back then. Nowadays, you would never let a 7-year-old go screw around in the city all on his own. You might not even let your 17-year-old go screw around in the city all on his own. But the fact is, all of those things that you're aware of and afraid of were more likely to happen back then. And I believe this trend, and I don't know it detailed enough to say more than this, but I believe that this trend has been downward across time. Okay? So, you're more afraid than you used to be, but there's actually less to be afraid of, which is its own really interesting thing. Now, here's where I start wondering about this, and I really won't take too long on this. On the one hand, it might be that we have less to be afraid of because we're more afraid of it, right? So maybe fewer kids get abducted because there's fewer kids wandering around the city streets all on their own. maybe there's, well, you get the idea. Because you're paying attention and guarding those things, hardening those targets, then maybe there's less of it happening, number one. Number two, the get tough approach bothers some people, certainly, and many of them write sociology textbooks, certainly. But at the same time, and they'll talk about the rise in the percentage of people in prison, and that is something that we need to think about when it comes to thinking, what are we really trying to do strategically with our laws and systems? That's a concern. Frankly, it bothers me. However, it seems like a serious case of domain dependence to not recognize that all of these things are happening in tandem. So yes, the prison rate's going up, and that's a little bit scary. And yes, we're more afraid of things than we ever were before. But in fact, a lot of this bad stuff's going down. Well, because these are correlations, not causations, it's very hard to say which one comes first, right? And once again, as with everything else I've said in class, I think what you speculate goes first probably says a lot about your politics. If your get tough comes first and safety comes later, then maybe you're a Republican, right? Maybe. You don't have to be, but maybe. If your get tough comes first and look at the prison rates, well, maybe you're a Democrat. You see what I'm saying? So there's data points, and the stories we build out of those data points for ourselves, that varies a lot. But anyway, that's not on the test. Close brackets, right? Does the United States have the highest incarceration rate in the world? Yes. Do women have to be fearful of strangers in the bushes jumping out and raping them and killing them? No, they need to be afraid of their boyfriends and husbands. The best way to think about deviance is it's not just behavior that's at the extremes. It's actually that the behavior causes negative social reactions, okay? So I don't know if any of you guys know someone with a backyard that's full of cactuses. Cacti, right? 100 different cacti in his own backyard. Weird dude, sure, but we'll let him be. I don't care. He's got a prickly personality. But he gardens naked. Okay. We're going to have a talk with him. He doesn't even have a privacy fence. So, having a garden of nothing but cacti, certainly fairly odd behavior. I mean, some people do, but who cares? It's cacti. It's not going to cause any negative social reaction. Gardening naked when you live in the middle of the city and you don't even have a privacy fence, that's going to bother your neighbors a little bit. And consequently, you're going to incite negative social reaction. Your neighbor's going to come over and they're going to be mad. That's the difference between deviance. So one is just odd behavior, and the other is behavior that incites negative social reaction. Now, if that negative social reaction is strong enough that somebody says, we're going to sit down and write laws about this, my neighbor shall not garden naked, and then pass it through whatever the formal bodies are needed to pass it through, then you've got a crime, right? So a crime is an infraction of laws, i.e. written down norms. Deviance is whatever is going to cause negative social reactions. So it can be, deviance covers that whole line from the most informal to crime. Yes. So with Durkheim again, a better way of saying what deviance does to the collective conscience of society is that it clarifies social norms and it increases conformity. So there you go. But what you're doing is you're reinforcing the collective conscience. Okay, now remember Merton's strain theory. In Merton's strain theory, you had socially acceptable goals and socially acceptable means to reach those goals. Okay? So if I want to grow up and be well-to-do, well, being well-to-do is a socially acceptable goal. People understand that. And there are ways to go about trying to do that. In fact, there are several ways. There's a lot of different ways. You could try and go to the NFL. It doesn't matter. There are a lot of different ways to try and grow up to be rich. If, however, you don't have access to those ways, just pick the stereotype of the ghetto child. I want to be rich, but I don't know any brain surgeons, and I don't know anybody that went to college, and I don't know anybody, right? If that character decides to get creative, right, in achieving a goal that everybody else wants, then Merton gives us a way of understanding that. You've got the goals, you've got the means, and you've got the different boxes that go along with it. The kid that decides to sell drugs to try and get rich because it's easier than school is, what was the word? I wonder if I have it. It was a variation of creative. But so look those up. Hippies and Amish were retreatists because they had completely given up on the game. Like, I'm not playing for those, and I'm not even playing your game. So they'd given up on the goals, and they'd given up on the means to achieve those goals. A conformist is a person that says, I want those goals, and I'll follow the means to get those goals. I want to be rich, and so I'll try and end up being a heart surgeon. That's it. So, but you can look it up. You'll get it better right anyway if you look it up. Oh, I'm not going to tell you. Now, there are some problems with this. The biggest problem is not all crimes are financial or even goal-oriented, right? There's a classic discussion of what is rape? Is rape about sex? No, rape's about power. Well, how do you fit that into strain theory? Sex isn't the goal. Something else is. And, what do you do? Or white-collar crimes. Real problematic for this one. Where do you fit Bernie Madoff into Merton's strain theory perspective? So getting rich is a goal, certainly. Madoff was already pretty well-to-do. So his goal was to be more well-to-do. It doesn't, everybody wants to be more well-to-do, but it's not as if A, he wasn't halfway to his goal, and B, he didn't already have the tools to achieve that. He's living in a midtown Manhattan apartment and he's working in financial services. Whatever he did for different reasons than is captured by Merton's little box. Now, academics find white-collar crime to be deeply frustrating. And, perhaps this is political, but bear with me for the explanation at the very least. So white-collar crime is professional crime, financial crime, those sorts of things. If I'm a murderer, and I walk up to a 40-year-old guy, and I kill him, I've just stolen, say, 30 years of his life, right? So murder is not a good thing, don't do murder. Someone who is concerned about white-collar crime will point out that if you steal someone's earnings over their lifetime, right? If you spend a third of your life working and a third of your life sleeping and a third of your life driving between the two, then stealing somebody's financial net worth is a little bit like stealing years of their lives, okay? Now, if we abstract this, let's say you make, $33,000 a year for 30 years, that puts you darn close to $1 million. So that's what you're worth, right? Maybe you'll make more, maybe make less, but it's a nice round number. So if I steal $1 million from somebody, in a sense, I've stolen their work life, all that time they spent working. But $1 million isn't that big in terms of financial crimes. I have no idea what Madoff's was, but it had to be in the tens, if not the hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, it's one thing to walk up to somebody, bludgeon them on the head and kill them and steal his 30 years that way. It's certainly messier. But if I steal 30 years of work life from 100 people, kind of a philosophically utilitarian perspective will say, you've cost society and people way more lifetime than the crude murderer ever did, right? And so it's kind of, you have to understand the sort of calculus about life and money that is going on in order to see why the academics get so frustrated. And that's for something like a $100 million crime. When you start to look at, these guys are going to go even a little bit further and start to say, what about pollution crimes? You know that downwind of coal plants, the asthma is much, much higher, right? So is that something that people should be worried about? Some yes, some no. Folks that are concerned about white-collar crime are going to say, if you're living downwind of that and your kid ends up with asthma and has a lower life quality, there's got to be some value to that. And you have to understand that argument. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. Inequality. Start with power. Power, by definition, is the ability to enact your will over the opposition of others. I.e., you can make somebody do what you want them to do. Power is one of the things that's going to separate a Marxist analysis of inequality from a Weberian understanding of inequality. For Marx, everything is economic. Weber brings in a tripartite, a three-variable understanding, which is going to include class, power, and prestige, with class capturing the economic part. But for Marx, power comes from economics, so it's all economic. Prestige comes from economics, so it's all economic. So Weber's got that three-part way, and Marx has only power being the main thing. A Along the same lines that the US has the highest per capita imprisonment rate for Western countries, another sort of element we wish weren't true, but kind of is that much of Europe and Scandinavia has higher social mobility than we do. So if you start out poor in those countries, your chance of ending up better off or better than ours. Sociologists love that one. The difference between an open and closed class society is how much movement there actually is. In a closed society, there's no movement. In an open society, there's a lot of movement. How much movement exists in the US is another one of those questions where your politics is going to influence your read of it. If you come from the left, there's not as much movement as people likely think there is. If you come from the right, there really are some rags to riches success stories. Okay? So how we interpret those may well be political. So a functionalist is going to assume that, and very similar to deviance, a functionalist is going to assume that A, inequality exists because it simply exists. It's a thing that you can't get rid of, and maybe you don't want to. And B, it serves some sort of positive function. And that positive function is going to include encouraging you to do better, because you'd rather do better than worse, right? So you might as well try. You want the people with the best skills to gravitate towards the most rewarding positions. That's the easiest way to say it. If we look at conflict theory, though, instead of saying, well, inequality is unavoidable and causes at least some good things to happen, the conflict theory is going to say that it's about the inequality comes from the powerful maintaining and exploiting their advantage over the powerless. And that's going to include all of the power relationships that sociology usually talks about. Race, sex, existing socioeconomics, and so on. So Marx had this idea of class consciousness and false consciousness. Class consciousness is when a group of people who share a class, a socioeconomic class, when that group of people recognizes they have some shared concern, some shared destiny, and it behooves them to act together in their own best interests, i.e., let's start a union, let's go on strike. I'm using all these fancy words to say just go on strike, so we'll go with that. Class consciousness is when the working class recognizes they have shared interests and are willing to work on it. If you, from a conflict perspective, the rich people are actively trying to, the more powerful class is actively trying to not let the less powerful class achieve that class consciousness, okay? False consciousness is, again, now this is from a Marxist analysis, false consciousness is when that group of people focus on something else and don't recognize their shared interests. So, and this can be anything that divides people. It can be Are you a Democrat or a Republican? Well, let's fight each other instead of banding together and addressing our real problems. Are you Notre Dame or LSU? Are you, race is another good one. Anything that keeps people fighting with each other instead of recognizing that we're actually all on the same team. And that's Marx, and Marx is clearly, the father of communism. But notice he's just rephrasing, united we stand, divided we fall. I mean, if you can get your opponent to fight within each other, that's awesome. I don't think that Marx said that. And I've got a handful of race questions, and then I can let you go. So we did talk about it. The one-drop rule is about how black you are, and the thing is according to the U.S. Up until fairly recently, being black was like being pregnant. You weren't a little bit black. You either were or you weren't. So if you had one drop of black blood, you were black. And this was specifically defined as one of your fifth generation ancestors, which fractionally works out to a 1 in 32. There's prejudice and there's discrimination. Prejudice is making up your mind too early, right? Prejudge. You learned that in grade school. Now, no one can control what's inside your head. You can be as nice a human or as obnoxious a human as you want. Prejudice is an attitude. Discrimination is your behavior. Okay? So people who are interested in discrimination laws, notice they can't write prejudice laws. I can't write a law that says you aren't allowed to like Irish Catholic average white guys who are professors. You can hate them all you want. You can, however, write laws against discrimination, and people do. But discrimination is saying, no, this person can't be a part of this, whatever it is. There are a couple of different ways to understand or to think about where prejudice comes from. When you hear people making the grandpa excuse, well, grandpa, he's kind of that way, but everyone his age was like that. That's just the way they thought. That's a social learning theory, right? They're learning what they're around. Another one when two ethnic groups are competing for jobs or resources or political issues, then you have group threat theory. My example of group threat theory, and I don't know Georgia enough yet, but back where I'm from, the farms have all consolidated. There aren't that many farmers left. The farms that are left got much, much larger. A lot of the factories are gone. But we do have lots and lots and lots of new immigrants, specifically, but not limited to, Mexicans who are coming in. So, the natives who don't want the $6 an hour meatpacking job are a little frustrated with this group in town, right? Because there are so little to go around here in this town, the whites and the Mexicans end up aggravating each other because they see each other competing over the same sort of sets of issues. Does that make sense? You'll do all right on the rest of them. All right. Yes. That's what we do for you.
Jeff.